we are happy to move this conversation along and to get to the second part of our conversation. And this is where we have experts or people that are working with young women across various projects. I'd like to invite them to join me onto the stage as I invite them. Okay, just a minute as we get them here. I see Victor. I'm expecting 2 more. Okay, I see Nicolene. I see Aline and Yemi. Okay, great. Nice to see you guys. You look great. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so in this session, we have Victor Mugo. Victor Mugo is part of the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. He's the regional coordinator for East Africa, and he works with youth in East Africa on climate change resilience issues. We have Yemi Adeyeye. Yemi Adeyeye is the executive director for YPAD, Young Professionals for Agricultural Development. And Aline is the executive manager for the Young Africa Works, which is IITA project. IITA is one of the centers of the CGIAR. So I'd like to welcome you, even as we get to hear some of the interventions and how exactly you are engaging young people in the work that you do. So let's get started, and I'd like to start with Victor. Victor, you did a study with some researchers. You will tell us about that. And you found that young women are actually participating in the agricultural value chain. But I was actually interested by the statement you wrote that they are actually hidden. Could you expound a bit on what you found? Why are they hidden?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're listening to us from. And sadly, we found out that the contribution of young women in agriculture really has not been quite recognized and has not been elevated to where it's supposed to be at the moment. And because of that, then we concluded from the research that the contribution of young women in agriculture really is hidden but not missing. It's not that they are not engaging in agriculture. It's not that they are not contributing towards agricultural transformation, but there are some factors that really tend to push them behind, and then they look like they are missing from the agricultural value chain, but really they are just hidden. So we undertook research together with our partners and our host, the Alliance of Biodiversity International, NCH. And we were undertaking research on climate risk profiling, looking at how climate risks really affect different areas. And we were conducting these in 14 Kenyan counties. And they really just are a tool for decision making for decision makers, especially county governments, so that they can be able to prioritize and plan in the context of agricultural development and climate change. But we went further to understand how climate change affects young people, and even further how climate change affects young men and young women differently. And then due to that research, then we came up with like 3 factors really that make young women seem like they are hidden from the agricultural value chain. And the first one is the assumption of homogeneity. And when we're looking at data from government sources, from different organizations, we tend to think that when looking at the vulnerability towards climate change, there's been a tendency to focus on just female vulnerability. And this often portrays young women and women as a homogeneous group. But by doing this, then we obscure other forms of inequality that young women face. And so young women's experiences are really quite unique, and we cannot be able to, or we cannot afford to make them as a homogeneous group by looking at them collectively as just women. And so some of these factors really shape young women's experiences, and then ignores the positive roles that these young women can play as active agents in climate change adaptation. So the assumption of homogeneity that young women and just the general category of women really tends to obscure the positive contribution that they make. The second thing that we found was the identity complex. And I think this was brought out very well by research by ICResearch. And so some of these young women tend to be mothers as well. And because of that, then they cannot fit in any of the categories, especially once organizations want to extend interventions towards them. So for them, they cannot benefit as youth because in the first sense, they have already transitioned to motherhood in the first place. And the second thing is that they've already adopted a new name and a new identity. And their community and society really does not consider them as young people in that regard. Then the other factor is that they cannot benefit as farmers. And once farmers are asked to come as beneficiaries, then they cannot be able to do that, especially because they do not own land. And if especially they got children from out of wedlock, then that even disenfranchises them even more. They cannot also participate as women because according to their maturity and also age-wise, they do not qualify to benefit as women. And because of this, we find that young women really have an identity complex. They don't know where to fit in within all these frameworks in which interventions for farmers really can be. And so as a result of this, then we see young women missing from the beneficiary radar. And the last thing that we kind of noticed was the lack of data, really specific data on young women really obscures them from meaningful participation in the agricultural value chain. It's common that what cannot be measured really cannot be improved. And we've seen that there are very big and critical gaps in available literature and available data. So data that concerns youth and climate change appears to be gender blind, and because of that, then young women are disenfranchised. Then data that concerns women and climate change is age blind, and then this also disenfranchises young women. And so we looked at these three things really: the assumption of homogeneity, the identity complex, and the obscurity because of lack of data as some of the main factors that make sure that and seem like young women are not participating in the agricultural value chain. But in real sense, we found that young women have the highest probability of staying in the farms. And for them, agriculture really is the only source of livelihood that they have, especially if they're living in rural areas.
Great, Victor. Those are quite interesting perspectives that you bring up, and all based on your research, which I understand it's going to be published very soon. Let me bring in Yemi. Yemi, you mentioned that there's an Africa-wide problem when it comes to involvement of young women in agriculture. And just taking a step back, even beyond the problems that Victor has highlighted, to you, what seems to be the problem that we are handling?
Hi, Vivian. Thanks so much for having me. Aline and Victor, it's a pleasure to share this space with you. And everyone listening, thanks so much for joining as well. And well, I made that's a very interesting insight in the sense that if we look critically at Africa in terms of our customary rights, things that are popularly done, the way we do things in general, and if we zoom in into the family level, how family are oriented, how duties are gendered, and let's step out of agriculture in a bit and look at the whole landscape, the social sphere. I will realize that the framing of things, the definition of opportunities, usually are either masculine defined or masculine inclined, in the sense that we have a world where being a man kind of puts you a step ahead of being a woman, not even in agriculture alone, across the different spaces. So when we zoom into agriculture, of course, we would expect a replication of what is obtainable in the society in general. So from my side of things, I would actually say that the most important thing for us to have this conversation is the need for everybody involved, everybody listening, everybody participating, everyone who's got power in institutions or everybody who's at a family level to acknowledge that this is an African-wide problem, which requires a sort of a broader solution whereby institutions like the African Union would have a really, really critical role to play. While there is a need for the local regional region of solutions and acknowledgement, as I said, I think we need to step up the notch a little bit, in the sense that conversations about gendered roles and gendered problems populate literatures. And Victor is also drawing our attention to some new nuances in terms of how problems are framed with negligence to the heterogeneity that comprises of actor groups. I mean, women different from men. And I would say that, okay, let me bring an example so that you may to better phrase what I'm about to talk about. The ILO said in 2019 that we have 68 million unemployed people. And when they zoom into the nuance, they realize that for every unemployed young man, there are 2 unemployed women. Now, that aside, now let's bring in another insight, saying that in terms of agriculture, we have about 60 to 80% of labor in the agricultural spaces contributed by women, right? And then, now let's put that aside again, that second nuance. Now, the third nuance is that as far as land is concerned in Africa, you know, we argue that about 60% of land, I mean, there are some range of statistics around that number. Some will say 70, some will say 65, but a higher percentage of land in Africa is arable, is cultivatable, is interesting for agriculture. Yet, customary issues in the African continent basically makes access to land a man thing. You know, access to land is already gendered. So now let's bring these 3 statistics together. Okay, agriculture requires land, at least traditional agriculture, right? And then women contribute a lot more on land, but then they have limited access to that land. Yet they are the most probably unemployed actor group in the society, which means they would need the access, the alternative opportunities that agricultural duties, agricultural opportunities might provide than a man. So which means me and Victor are more likely to have other kind of jobs, while Aline may tend to need the opportunities that agriculture provide. But then I'm stuck with land and access to everything, so I've got a lot of access. But Aline needs to struggle a bit more to get what I already have. Mm-hmm. So this is what we're struggling with as a continent. And I think at the very, very traditional level, all the way to the regional, to institutions in Africa, there's a way by which some protocols can be put in place. Now, I'll be a bit more specific. I would advise that I think there's a role the African Union can play. And I would say this is how it could happen. There are access that are related to being part of African Union. There are some opportunities that come with it, no matter how small it is. And then if this access exists, this access can be tagged based on the level of adherence of local institutions to some particular set of protocols. So which means if countries abide some particular level of protocols, then they might have different range of access to these opportunities. So now we could say that targeted investment at a local level, so basically countries that would have a particular percentage of their budget to support agriculture per year, they could say a particular percentage of that percentage should go to solving gender-related issues in agriculture. Now, the level to which a country adheres close to that percentage could be linked to the kind of access that it gets in African Union, or a particular aspect of access that African Union grants. So in that sense, countries are mandated to follow this process that actually solves a problem in real time. So rather than suggest protocols for countries to deal with, it's a kind of a mandate where countries can actually follow a particular set of protocols under the guidance of the African Union. So that's an example of how what I think will work.
that we should be looking to, which has helped us to advance this discussion further. Let me bring in Aline. Aline, I'm looking at what you do under the Agripreneurs Project, which is a collaboration between IITA and MasterCard Foundation. In your opinion, are we creating enough space for young women who want to start a career or to derive a livelihood from the agriculture sector?
Hi, good morning, afternoon to everyone from wherever they're joining. I think we are moving toward the right direction. And by that, I'm saying that we are really quite far from reaching that wishful gender equality that women should have, or men and women should have within our age groups, within the youth as a group. But we are moving towards something. And the reason I'm saying we are moving into something is because we need to take a more positive approach into looking at things and drop the victimhood approach. We cannot always consider young women as vulnerable, because that staged them into a corner already that makes it difficult for them to be given responsibility. It put us as young people in a situation where we need to be nursed instead of putting us on a situation where we need to be involved and implicated in the decision-making processes. And so what I'm saying is, of course, having this kind of discussions that we are having already now is something that is great. And there's, to introduce myself, as you've already said again, I'm Aline Mugisho, and I am the executive manager for the Young Africa Works IITA project. And our project adopts a really innovative approach, and it was very much inspiring to listen to Victor, Jemima, Grace, and everybody else that has taken place into the different sections that I have attended since this morning. Very much interested in looking how, especially, we are going to advance policy to move this discussion from just the talks to the do's, you know, and make sure that not only that women and younger people are given a space to create businesses, but create an environment that allow those businesses to grow. We need to get to that level to create a healthy soil, so to speak. Since we are speaking agriculture, we need to create a fertile soil for women, young women, young boys, to be able to not only create enterprises, but to be able to sustain these enterprises. We need to create a good environment in terms of funding, access to finance, which is one of the aspects that the Young Africa Work IITA is seriously considering. So we are working along 5 key areas. One of it is really to strengthen agricultural training, because we need to move toward an approach of mentorship, you know, when young people can be learning progressively from the elder ones, not only as they supposed to copy and paste what has been happening in that sector, but that they can bring in their innovation and learn from also the mistakes that were being created. What's the space that a young woman is actually given in the agricultural sector? We are still looking into a very slippery soil, so to speak, you know. While we need to provide the youth with particular skills, and we need to really start moving toward the transition from vocational training centers to youth agribusiness parks, that is one aspect of it, which is really considering the education aspect or the training track of our project. And also that should be a key aspect of what needs to happen within the agricultural sector. We also need to think of how we negotiate that space, as I already said, in terms of securing loans, you know, youth-sensitive loans that are gender balanced, that are looking at gender-sensitive also. Things that loan in agribusiness that not only support programs, but also support or connect the young women, the young boys to opportunities and mentorship opportunities, networking opportunities, so that they don't only get stuck within the value chain aspect or the value addition aspect, but they're also able to move to higher places and higher perspective. We all can agree that the best way, really, the best way that we can start addressing gender inequality, and we can start to address the gap between youth access to entrepreneurship opportunities and finances opportunity. The best way for us to address that is to actually create those by making the youth participate in these processes. And the space in which young women occupy in this place cannot be a space that is given to them. It has to be a space that they recognize that they already have. Because young women have been strongly involved in agricultural value chain. However, we have a very little recognition for the contribution that have been making. Decision-making processes is one of the aspects, but also what kind of policies are being put in place to allow young women to break myths like collateral that cannot be given, or that in many African countries today, young women are still not able to provide, because the land is not considered as something women should access or young girls should access. Is considered as something that boys should remain keeping, because land is strongly attached to ethno-cultural values that continue to make it difficult for women to do. Now, women are not really...
I can come back to you. I just wanted to come in at this point and maybe get some questions. We have one for Victor, and Mofa is asking what age group you are referring to, and maybe while you answer that, and then we'll go back to Aline towards the end. You can also tell us how we could enhance the resilience of young women participating in the ag sector, especially in crisis situations. We are now in the COVID pandemic. We have climate change to think about. And we know that all these are affecting women differently, but how do we enhance their resilience? So maybe short, just a short answer in a minute.
Okay, thank you for that. For that, I think we considered what the Kenyan government considers as youth. So that's between 18 and 35. And so that's just an answer to her. And so if I got your question correctly, what you're asking, what are the practical ways of engagement, especially going forward exactly. in building inclusive and resilient food systems where young women are involved? And the first thing I think I would say would be having a positive identifier for young women, because of all these aspects that kind of blind them or hide them. It's absolutely important that we have a positive identifier for young women, especially in development interventions. Otherwise, in most cases, we tend to think and tend to find that they are outside the beneficiary gap. And another way another way to really do this will be to have programmatic interventions that look at intersectionality of aspects. And by this, having a program that looks not only on gender issues, not only on youth issues, not only on jobs issues, it can go forward to look at even aspects such as nutrition, such as climate change, and that. And I can give two examples, especially from some of the work that the CGR is doing. One is like, for example, the high iron beans, really, which are climate smart. And by that fact, tolerant to pests and diseases and droughts, then which are highly nutritious, and by that fact, then the market can benefit from nutrition, but as well as the young women who are growing these high on beans can also benefit from the nutrition benefits from the iron content in the beans, and that it also considers aspects such as, because they are more highly marketable, than even aspects of jobs and securing livelihoods. So the intersectionality of aspects, once we deal with development programs, can be one of the areas that we really look up.
Okay, Victor. Yemi, you mentioned something concerning land policies, and even as we are talking about land policies, as you touch on that, you can also look at policies in general. What will it take to implement those policies that exist towards supporting women, young women for that matter? You're muted. You're muted.
All right. Thanks for the question. I think, okay, before I go into some recommendations on that note that might work, I think we have a customary traditional limitation which are perpetuated continuously by institutions and agencies at the different levels. So, I mean, addressing the recommendation to change culture is one of the most difficult things to do. But I think I will call our attention to everybody listening and every institutions and every household members that it's really, really important for us to reflect on how customs might need to evolve. You know, customs that are particularly limiting to potentially vulnerable people in the community, which from this conversation we realized tend to be women in agriculture and young rural people. So what are the traditions that we have that would need to evolve, that would need to interact with modernity? To what extent would that happen? And how can we lead those efforts whereby women are in better position to also engage in these opportunities that agriculture provide? That's the first thing. And the second thing is that for all the networks that exist right now, there are a lot of networks to support women in agriculture, and I think that is really, really important. Their roles are key, and but then their efficiency could be better advanced through the support of associated network and agencies. So, which means we should try as much as possible to give more voice and more space to all this network and their members to occupy space appropriately and to be able to contribute to the framing of how we identify problems. Because Aline mentioned something very, very important. Sometimes the way we identify problems and the way we put forward solutions in itself could be disenfranchising. And I think, you know, when I take a step back as a social scientist, I would even interrogate the framing of resilience, you know, because resilience could be understood in many different ways as well. And I think there's a need to draw nuances to this kind of framing. For example, resilience in what context? Is it the ability to recover or the ability to adjust to unfavorable change? So if we are talking about the ability to recover, you know, it's a different set of needs. We are talking about affinity to adjust to unfavorable change. So we actually promote that. It's a different point as well, because all these things have policy implications. Because promoting something could also lead to the disenfranchisement of people you're supposed to support. So yeah, supporting the network, giving voices to them, opening spaces where those things need to happen. And then progressive agricultural education is needed as well across different levels at the foundational level where we talk about traditional agriculture, all the way to modern infrastructures used in agriculture. Speaking to the issue the way it's supposed to be spoken to, and not forgetting that people, some actors are invisible, as Victor is drawing our attention to. And the work of extension and rural advisory practices is also quite key, because the way advisors go by doing their role at the local level also will be gendered. You know, in the situation where rural advisors themselves cannot disentangle the way they are compounding the already complex situation by putting women already also in limiting roles where conversations occur about the problems on the farmland. So more awareness at that level is also quite important. And then the discussions around intersectionality. Victor mentioned that as well. Because we are in a complicated society, and then identities are also quite sophisticated. When we talk about gender, there is also a difference between an urban woman, the access she has, in correlation to an indigenous woman, the access she has. And when you draw attention to these multiple layers of intersectionality, it has different implications for policy. So drawing nuances is also quite important. So I'll stop for now. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Emmy. Yummy. And unfortunately, my time is really going too fast, and we need to wrap up this particular segment. But I think I should give Aline just 1 minute to wrap up. I cut you short. You are giving us some very important points about how to engage women, what we can do. So maybe just a probing question. what, in your opinion, would happen if we don't manage to make agriculture more attractive to these young women?
We will not shift from the food insecurity situation that we are facing. To be very, very precise, women need to be more engaged. Opportunities need to be created to them. We need to create a community awareness programs that will be able to sensitize local consumers on encouraging local businesses in those communities that they work and operate. But in addition to that, we need to be able to think about how we publicly represent the young agricultural entrepreneurs. How do we present them out there? Do we present their business? How serious do we present their business? What is the space we give them within the business platform as young female entrepreneurs? Do we even consider them as agripreneurs? And then we need to stop confusing or even thinking that agriculture as a sector will quickly shift from the existing gender roles. You know, women businesses, even within the agricultural sector, can easily be confused from their non-role of mothers or family, caregivers. And so when they shift from that space to the business, when are they, how are they navigating that space of shifting from food providers to business people, and how is the communities that they evolve in are looking into that? But on a higher level, how are we thinking of business aspects in terms of networking? How are we thinking in terms of the different value chain in which they are involved? And how are we presenting them as professional entrepreneurs or as specialists, agricultural specialists, either into research or in the business field? These are key aspects that we can easily think of in terms of bridging that gap and securing that field as a healthy and growing sector for young women.
Okay. Let me bring the discussion to a close, but let me give you an opportunity for a parting shot, even as we wrap up. Victor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think the major thing that we can take from here is that young women face unique issues. And the faster we are able to realize that, then the faster we can be able to structure interventions that really can be able to help them and be able to include them even in the agricultural transformation. We do realize that there's, as Yemi had alluded to, intersectionality is quite important. And I really like this because even for the aspects, and I think Agnes will speak about this even coming into, the fact that it's a food systems approach. And even with this, then our programs should reflect that, we do not only look at just one issue, but we are supposed to look at different issues at the same time. And the faster we can, I think, do this, then the faster we can be able to transition to a food secure continent and even a food secure world in which women, young women and women really contribute towards food security.
Thank you, Victor. Yemi?
All right. Okay, so my final statement is that we have a problem. It's not just in agriculture. It's an African-wide one on a lot of issues. And it's important we acknowledge it as such. The same problem in women in tech, in women in business, it's the same issue. And it speaks to the need for us to then look down into the grassroots, the fundamentals of Africanism, our custom, our tradition, what are the limiting factors that are there, and how could that change? And that change will start from the household. Can we zoom in from our households as well? How do we limit? How are some rules are limiting? How are some encouraging us a particular gender versus others? And that aside, second thing, because institutions are structured and they have mandates and principles, they can lead. They can, because Africa is a continent that is evolving structure-wise a lot. And I think the roles of institutions cannot be overemphasized. The likes of African Union have a role to play. They can lead us in the right direction by mandating opportunities for access in the African Union to necessities that need to happen on ground in different countries.
Thanks, Yemi. Indeed, crucial role for the African Union Commission, and I think it's a good step to have this conversation. You may be aware that whatever we forward from these sessions will be used to advise the next ministerial meeting that's happening next year. Aline, let's finalize in the next 1 minute, then we can just wrap up the session. We have Nicolene coming up and also Dr. Kalibata from AGRA.
Thank you so much, Vivian. So I think my advice in this point as to how do we encourage young women growth in the agricultural sector is we need to strengthen female-male partnerships. Mm-hmm. In all essence, we have to have a gendered approach that consider the contribution of men and women in helping women to evolve and grow as a good and very essential partnership. And then we need to understand, we need to break the existing challenge. It's not a competition between men and women. It is a platform that is, we need to create a healthy discussion between those two to break this feeling of us versus them. We need to get to a level where we can start talking from a business language perspective as partners as to who is bringing what to the table. And in this discussion, unfortunately, we cannot exclude men from the discussion as the many gender approaches have led towards opening opportunities for women and creating that clash, cultural clash within communities in which women grow and evolve. It is very important and paramount to our programming that we consider the cultural or the socio-cultural sensitivity in which women business are created so that we can address them and break them as barriers to allow women involvement and to allow women-led entrepreneurship growth.
Okay, thank you so much. It's now my pleasure to wrap this up so that we can move over to the final session, which is to just synthesize everything. I want to thank you, Victor. I want to thank you, Yemi, Aline, and all the previous speakers for joining us and for your insightful comments. So thank you very much.